The Stellenbosch Mafia is a book about a group of businessmen in the picturesque Boland town of Stellenbosch in the Western Cape. The term Stellenbosch Mafia, of course, has become a loaded term referring to this group of businessmen, all billionaires, most of them Afrikaans, all of them white, and seemingly led by one Johan Rupert, who incidentally denies that he's a member of the Mafia because he lives in Somerset West. Does the Mafia exist? I think they exist as a network. I don't think there's anything illegal about what they do, but what is certainly true is that there's a strong, interconnected grouping of extremely rich and influential businessmen who call Stellenbosch their home, their base, and they do exert an enormous amount of influence on various industries in the country and in social life, and quite possibly, and definitely actually, in politics too. In this country, you can't talk about the economy without talking about politics. You can't talk about politics without talking about the economy. And when you run the big enterprises that these men do, or are involved in these big industries like these men are, you cannot help but be involved in politics. You cannot help but to have a stake in the future of the country. So yes, they are connected, deeply connected with politicians, with politics, in how the country is being managed, because they've got a financial stake in the success of the country. So yes, they are deeply and very intimately involved in the political life of the country as well. A good example of how this works is when Jacob Zuma fired Nhlanhla Nene as Minister of Finance in December 2015. You had all these fund managers across the world wondering what was happening in the country. Will the country survive? They didn't call National Treasury. They didn't call their investment desks in Johannesburg. They didn't call investment bankers that they knew in Cape Town. They called Johan Rupert because he knows what's going on. I grew up in Stellenbosch. I was lucky enough to be a beneficiary, I suppose, of many of these networks. So it was a difficult book to write. Stellenbosch is a wonderful, quaint little town ensconced between the blue mountains, cobalt blue mountains, and in the winter you've got rugby that absolutely dominates the landscape, sweeping rains, you've got the vineyards, you've got the students, but it's also referred to as the bubble. The residents call it the bubble. It's ensconced away from the rest of the country, which makes it such an interesting case study of the interesting people that live there, the influence, the outsized influence that they exert on society, economy and politics. The term the Stellenbosch Mafia has over the last couple of years been weaponized. It has become a political term. It especially shot to prominence during the Bell Pottinger campaign of 2016-2017 when Johan Rupert and the Steinhoff gang was put forward as the exemplars of white monopoly capital, WMC, and the EFF especially uses the Stellenbosch Mafia as an example or the manifestation of monopoly capital, of how capital works to subjugate the masses. So it's a term which, for the members of the so-called Mafia, initially it was a joke, initially it was fun, it was even a badge of honor for a successful industrialist. These days it's become a political swear word. The most interesting thing was to try and connect the dots of Stellenbosch's history to Stellenbosch's present and to South Africa's future. The most interesting thing of the interesting part of the book was certainly getting insight into someone like Johan Rupert's life. Johan Rupert, especially the name Rupert, along with Oppenheimer, has become synonymous in certain circles with WMC. They have their detractors, and it was fascinating for me to get some insight into someone like the Rupert's life, to see how they operate and what influence they exert, not only on South Africa, but certainly on the small town of Stellenbosch with an outsized influence.